Hi everyone and welcome to week 5. This week we're going to be looking at the oral reading passages. These passages are also used for comprehension, but I think oral reading is pretty detailed and involved, so we're going to spend this week looking at the oral miscues. So the first thing we're going to do, now that we've done the word list, we know where our students' independent instruction and frustrational level on their word lists are. This is also going to help us decide where to start the passages. Again, you typically want to start 2 grade levels below the student's instructional reading level on the word list. So if, for example, the student was on 7th grade instructional level with word lists, you're going to go down 2 grades to grade 5 to start the comprehension and oral reading passages. Remember that we're always going to stay in Form A when you're doing your assessments. No skipping around. The forms are not interchangeable in that sense. So if you have your own student that you're assessing, you're going to go ahead and find their word list and go ahead and start the passages. If you're using either Daphne or Elena, this week I'm going to have you practice, and as we move through the week later on, I'll be putting in Elena and Daphne's word lists probably towards the end. So when you start the passages, you're going to ask the student to read the short story aloud to you, and in the passage it does have like a little script at the top we'll look at in just a minute. You can use this to help you if you're not comfortable kind of going off of your own. You want to make sure they know, take their time. This isn't like a high stakes assessment. You're helping me out in class right now. Anything you can do to help the student be comfortable. And then as they're reading, you're going to mark the miscues in the appropriate column, and again we're going to look at that in just a minute. The key here is if there's any doubt and you're not sure and you're kind of questioning back and forth whether or not it was an error, then go ahead and just mark it incorrect. And then I also wanted to point out, I could not get them to agree to videotaping. So it's kind of a little bit of a disadvantage for you guys, because really it's important to observe what the students are doing physically. That's really part of this assessment. But the videotaping did not happen, so you'll have audio tapes if you're using Daphne or Elena. If you have the videotapes, I'll show you next week what you can do, or maybe I'll send it out to you later on in an email, what you could be looking at physically if you're testing your own student. Okay, so this is where our textbooks come into play. You really need to have your textbooks. I can no longer put pages of the textbook up because of copyright reasons. So if you don't have your textbook, now is the time to make the decision whether or not you're going to be able to get it, whether or not you're going to be able to have someone you can borrow it from, or if you might need to just be aware of the drop date for the class if you know you're not going to be able to get your textbook at all this semester. Okay, and I think it's mid-October is the drop date for the class. And I say that because I, myself, giving this assessment, reference back to the pages all the time in the text just to kind of refresh myself. So for example, page 28 is going to be, and I'll show you just a minute what that looks like, is going to be the page that's going to help you see how to code the miscues when students misread words or forget words or flip them around and reverse them. So you really need to have your textbook for that. So once you have the students reading and you're marking off their miscues, we're going to put that in the columns that are to the right of the passages. Again, I'll show you that in just a minute. And then your BRI textbook, again, I'm referencing the textbook, super important. Pages 32 through 35 are going to provide you with some of the textbook definitions for substitutions, omissions, insertions, and those sorts of things that you're going to be marking off while the child reads. And then at the bottom, you'll be marking the total number of miscues and writing those in the column marked total. And you'll also note in the text that it does say you can leave out the self-corrections in this section, because if they're self-correcting, they're repeating the word again and saying it correctly. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the elements I just mentioned to you. This is page 28 that I was talking about as far as the coding. You can't just make up your own coding. This is really important. Once you get into a school and into a district, they typically will have a format that they use, and you want to make sure you use the same format that others are using. These are very similar to what most school districts use. So for example, substitutions are very frequent. You'll see kids make those errors when they put another word in the place of a different word, and you just simply write the other word on top of it, just like they did here. Omissions are when they leave words out completely and you'd be crossing out the line. Insertions are when they put a word in, and that's where you use your little caret. So the child here said, soon he instead of soon was. And then you have reversals, which are when kids flip words around. So here they would have said, they are twins. And then you have some different things that kids might do, like repeat sections of the text. You also have correcting a miscue. And then you have some other things along the way that might come up. These are very much less frequent. So if you have things that come up that we didn't discuss or aren't some of the frequent ones, these are things you can email me about during the week, and I can get back to you because it might be things that I can send out an email for if we start to see common ones come up. So you just want to make sure you have this with you open. I always keep this next to me when I'm scoring the students' work. And then, as I mentioned before, you'll be marking your tallies in this little column here, which is to the right of the passages the child is reading on your scoring sheets. And here's some of those common words that I mentioned: substitutions, insertions, omissions, and reversals. And then we will talk in a minute about significant miscues. And those are miscues where students are, the meaning of the text is changed, which is important because then that's going to change their comprehension, right? So those are what we consider significant miscues. Okay, and then let's see. So as I mentioned, you'll be totaling the miscues, and then you'll determine if those miscues are significant or not. And again, that's meaning changing. If you're unsure, again, like I said before, go ahead and just mark it significant. You're going to be adding the number of significant miscues and writing them in that section, which is called significant miscues. These are both important to help you determine a student's reading level as far as the oral miscues are concerned. So we'll look at another example here. When you look at the scoring guide at the bottom of the page, this is going to determine where you're going to place the student, right? So you have your total miscues right here. That's that first column. But then you are going to take a look at the significant miscues, because if they're making, 6 miscues, but they're not significant, then we can start to think about if it's instructional / frustration, maybe we can keep them still in the instructional level instead of moving them to frustration. But once those miscues become significant, now they're going to lose comprehension, and this is going to become something that's going to push them into frustration. And in the sample I show you in just a second, this is kind of what the case was when I looked at Daphne's. You're going to make sure that you record the results for this in your scoring sheet in the miscues column. Copy the number from the significant miscues and make sure that, we didn't do this in class, sorry. Regardless of the student's reading level, you will now use the same passage to determine comprehension levels. So my suggestion for you is when you're doing the oral, just go right into the comprehension questions. For the purpose of this week in practice, I only left you drawing a blank here, the oral, and I took out the questions for now because next week we'll take a look at comprehension questions. The oral reading just takes time and really need some time to spend practicing that and understanding it. So I left you with that just for this week. And then I also wanted to just show you real quick. I didn't put this in the slideshow, but I'm going to flip over and see if I can find it real quick. Close your eyes if you get dizzy because I'm going to scroll real quick through the page. Sorry. Or I'll just look at one real quick, but if I can find it, here it is. So this is a place we're going to keep coming back to because we're going to be putting in our data here. So for example, if you've already done your words in isolation, which you should have done your word list, now you're going to come here and put in the child's score. So if you started at 5th grade for your student, you'll come here and put the total cite correct, your analysis, and then you're going to put the total. And this is for the word list. And then you'll put where it fell, where the student fell as far as instructional, independent, or frustration. So you want to make sure to go back and start filling this in. This is kind of like the cover sheet for all of the data you're collecting. And then here, as we move through, actually we haven't done any of the, we won't be doing the comprehension yet, but here's where you'll put your miscues and the level that they fell for the reading passages. And then once you've done all the reading passages, we'll talk a little later on about analyzing the actual miscues themselves. Okay, so this is found at the beginning of the performance booklet for A, where you start to find your A forms. Okay, I'm going to hop back to the presentation just for a quick minute and show you a quick example. So for this one, you can see that they've marked off some things the students were doing. This was an omission. You can see if they self-corrected, you're going to put a little SC next to that. And we're still marking it, but in the end, it's self-corrected, so we're not going to count it, right? And then we have another substitution and a substitution. So you can see they're marking down here 3 in the column here, 1 here. But when you total those up, they equal 4, right? But you can notice they left here with 3 because they didn't count the self-correction. And they didn't mark any of them as significant miscues. So let's take a look why. Like a spark touched the leaf. So it doesn't really change the meaning, right? Because a leaf is the same thing as leaves, just plural. So they left that as not significant. And then and doesn't necessarily change the meaning of the passage or the comprehension of the article. So they left that also not as significant. Okay, and when you look down below, you can see because they had 3 missed, it marks them right here at the independent instructional level. All right, so that's one example of kind of what your scoring sheets are going to look like. So I'm adding in an extra clip to a video I just made for you guys today based off of a reading passage that I had Daphne do. This is years ago, so her voice sounds very young. It's very cute. But just so you can see the process I go through when I'm actually scoring the sheets for you. So I hope you find that helpful. And if you'll notice, we don't have in our sheets the background knowledge, but I do think that's really important to consider. Only because when I had Daphne doing one of the articles today, one of the stories, it was about soccer, and she really doesn't know anything about soccer. She never played soccer. We don't watch soccer, and so there was very little background knowledge on it. And then when I went up, so she didn't do well as well. And then when I went up to the next grade level, she actually did better than the soccer one because she really didn't have the background knowledge for soccer. So all of this stuff is important when we consider case studies and what students, how they're doing in their reading. Okay.
Okay, so I want to show you guys what the process I go through when I'm listening to a student do their oral reading of the passage. So you can see this one is first grade because it's 2 ones. That's middle, so middle of first grade would be the reading passage. So let's listen to the child read. This is actually Daphne from many years ago. You'll hear her voice is very little. So we're going to listen, and I'm going to show you the thoughts as I go through coding. Called Spotty. You're going to read the story about Spotty, and then I'm going to ask you some questions like I did last time. All right? You ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead and start Spotty.
Spotty. One day, Spotty went for a walk.
Okay, so one of the first things I coded, because I mean, it sounded like she sounded it out, but I think she said it first. So when students repeat what they say, you're going to put an underline under the word that they repeated. So I heard her say went twice.
The sun was warm. Spotty
just say what comes to your mind.
Walked to the pond. There he was, a frog.
Okay, so on this one, I know it it sounded like this one, she definitely sounded out first. She whispered it to herself, so I didn't count that as a repetition. I kept going. But here she said, there he was, and then she said the whole thing again, a frog. So because of that, she did say was instead of saw, so we're going to write was on top because that's a substitution. And then I underlined it because this was the whole section she repeated as well.
The frog was on the log. Spotty went to...
Okay, so here she said the frog was on the log. So again, substitutions get written on top. And then Spotty went, she said instead of wanted, to, let's see.
Play. Spotty...
Hold on. Okay, go ahead and get the real stuff.
Spotty began to look.
Okay, so I guess we could have, now listening to it again, I can take this repetition part off because she didn't really say it. But she said, Spotty began to, and then you heard her whisper, sounded out to herself, and then she repeated the whole thing again.
The frog jumped into the water. Then Spotty jumped into the water. But poor Spotty did not know what to do.
Okay, so again, repetition and a repetition.
The water was very deep. The water went away over his head. Spotty moved his log.
So we have another substitution here. She said away instead of way. And then she said his log, not leg. So that's another substitution.
Soon his head came out of the water. He kept on moving. He came to the author sit of the pond that he how Spotty learned to swim.
Okay, so that was a struggle for her. But you can see, I didn't mark the other one. Maybe if you did, that's fine. You can see sometimes doing these are subjective to kind of like what you hear and what you feel. I left that one not a miscue. But she did say Sid instead of side, and she also said he instead of is. Okay, so now what we do is we look at the miscues section here to decide what miscues she made. So if we go back and look, repetitions don't show up in the miscues. So I just marked off at this point, she didn't do any insertions where you put a word in. She didn't do any omissions where she took words out, and she didn't do any reversals, which is where you flip-flop words. So we had this substitution here. We had 2 here, 1 here for log, and 2 here for Sid and he. And then you want to make sure you tally them up at the bottom. And then we look over here, and this is really important because we're going to decide if they're significant miscues or not significant miscues. Like if a kid puts in home instead of house, did it change the meaning? Not really. But was it a miscue? Yes. So now we're going to kind of ask ourselves some more questions. This is also where we're going to code the repetitions. Okay, so you can see she does repeat a lot when she realizes what she wants to say. So I marked off the repetitions anywhere that we underlined. And then also now we're going to look at these miscues, the substitutions, and decide if they were significant and made a meaning change. So if you look here, was and saw do not mean the same thing at all. So I put them as, yes, significant. Also, we have the, not necessarily the, because does that change the meaning? The frog was on the log or a log? No. But here, Spotty went instead of wanted. That does change the meaning, so I marked it off as a meaning change. Okay, so sorry for the back and forth. I'm working on my own at-home doc cam. Okay, what else do we do? Let's see. Okay, so then we go down to other insertions. So away and way, yes, are different and do change the meaning. And then log and legs are different as well. So I marked both of those as significant over here. And then lastly, changing Sid and he are two different meaning changes as well, so I marked those off here. So now in this section, you can see we put repetition, she had 5, and then for the significant miscues, she had 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then you code them down here at the bottom. Now we're not using this and we're not using this during this semester. But when you look over here, now let's look at where we're going to place her. I think that's pretty clear just listening to her read. But so she had 6 to 9 total miscues, right? That was our error here. Which put her, in the middle, right? But when you look at how many significant miscues she had, which was 6, that puts her over the top. And really, when you listen to her read, there were so many significant miscues, we would mark this as frustration for the oral reading. Okay, so that's kind of the process you want to think about going through when you're listening to your own students, or if you're listening to Daphne or Elena. Keep the recording with you. You can hear I had to stop and record. I had to stop and mark as I went, and I did that several times just to make sure I had the right codings down. And I also referenced that book page number in the BRI book. This is why your BRI book is super important, so I hope you have it by now, because you'll need to be referencing this regularly. And even though I've done this many, many, many times, I still go back and reference the page. How come I don't know it by the number yet? But 28. Page 28 is the suggested codings. Okay?